Welcome back to another episode of Hobby Time in the Murder Basement, where today I sit down with Jason from Monument Hobbies and we talk about how he got in the hobbies, the beginning of Slow Fuse, and the future of ProAcryl Paints. Stick around, we have an excellent conversation. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today in the Murder Basement in my new studio. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to hang out with a podcaster like me. If you are not familiar with Jason and his work with Monument Hobbies, he is responsible for one of the best miniature paints I have ever used and a plethora of also other really cool hobby aids and stuff. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Heath, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Yes. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of start off with is you and I we met back at Warfare Weekend in November here in St. Louis, and I was really floored by how just friendly and accessible you were, and you were just like in for whatever happened. You know, I think it was your first time ever doing Warfare Weekend, and it looked like you were busy basically from the second the store opened to the second the store closed. There was people like coming in staring at your models.
Yeah, it was awesome. We had a blast. It was the first time we'd been there. They reached out to us, and I think that was the first time that they have been a bigger event than just Privateer Press.
Right.
And so it was really interesting and fun to be there, be part of it, help them grow into something bigger. And looking forward to if all the stars align this year, we'll be back. We'll hope that might actually be the first convention we're allowed to go to. I don't know.
Right. That's I'm already telling all my friends here in St. Louis, like, just request it off. Like, we don't know what's gonna happen. Request it off. If you cannot go, that's fine. But like, there's a really cool thing happening there, and it feels like it's kind of on that cusp of like exploding, which is really exciting, you know. And I think as like Privateer Press will probably always have a huge like pillar there, and it's probably going to still be one of their biggest gatherings of the year. It seems like, you know, the X-Wing people there were huge. You know, seeing like the underdogs, like the Judgment kids coming in, I was really impressed by what they brought. And it begs the question, and I wanted to tackle this later, but when is Creature Caster going to give us rules for all their cool models instead of us using them as counts as, and we can do like cool things with them? Because I've got a case of cool stuff that needs to hit the table.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, it's always when you have something cool, it's always the dream. I think as gaming nerds, right? It's at some point you're like, eventually we will birth this baby, right? Creature Caster, though, as an entity, I know those guys are working really hard to get all of this stuff ready. They've got a kind of a long road to hoe, because in order to do a game, you have to have all the pieces ready to go, or at least at some level, right? So you can have multiple factions, you can have a good representation of the units in each faction and things like that. So I know those guys are trying really hard and coming up with it. You've seen the newer like 40 mil models, the Matriarchs and Patriarchs that have come out. They just released something, and even a single for the Onslaught faction. So good stuff going on over there. I think that in the years to come, that's one of those where it's like hashtag soon. I don't know. Everybody wishes it could happen tomorrow, but I don't. It's going to take longer than that.
Yeah, we have seen games launch that have been too half-baked, and you know, you get this preemie baby of a game out there in the universe, and they can't stand up on their own 2 feet, and that can be a killer of a brand. And I would hate to see that happen to you guys. You know, you all do some really amazing stuff for the hobby and the hobby community. And I would be happy with just keeping the counts as stuff for until you guys are ready. But I think it seems like Peter's been sharing a lot of like concept artwork that's actually like fleshed out instead of just like a model rendering. I'm like, oh, they're doing something over there. They are doing something.
Yeah, Pete's always hard at work getting new designs and stuff laid out. They've got a great art team behind him that makes a lot of that stuff come to life. So it's not just all, back a napkin. And there's a lot of, it's funny that there's a ton of stuff that kind of doesn't ever get shown and doesn't ever come to light. That's just kind of the way the creative world works. There's so many ideas flying around in a studio that never see the light of day, but the ones that do make it out of the tank are usually, really, really amazing. So it's always fun to watch for sure.
It's seeing the development on that side has been really cool. But I do want to talk about your hobby history and how you can come from little toy soldiers to being Monolith Hobbies, and like I said, for me, the ProAcryl paint line is like full stop my favorite paint I have ever used, and I think I've probably sold 6 full sets to like friends, like, no, you have to do this, and just like a couple they test out like a blue or something and they're like, oh no, this is too good.
Exactly.
So how did you get into the hobby? Where did little Jason figure out that toy soldiers were cool?
Holy heck. So I hit the half century mark later this month. So this is a long tail. I've been around doing this for quite a while. So it's funny because it started with Dungeons and Dragons, just flat out. I had no idea these things existed. This is probably 1979, 1980-ish.
The good era, yeah.
9-10 years old, and there's another fellow nerd on my block. This is back obviously back in the time where if it wasn't in the kids that lived in the 1 block radius that you were allowed to travel in as a child back then, you didn't know that it existed, right? I mean, you might see a commercial on television, but of course the world we live in isn't very commercialized and never has been. But there was a guy who was probably at the time, I would say he was probably in junior high, and then we as a block group of kids, there were 4 of us who kind of grew up together across that 4 or 5 years as we all went through junior high school. And he was trying to dungeon master and didn't have anybody else that would do this stuff. It was funny because he was a football player. He played junior high and high school football and was very good. And until he hurt himself, was probably going to get drafted into a big college. But he had this nerd side that he had to keep away from everybody, right? I mean, as we joke about letting our nerd flag fly these days, it's like back then it was like, you don't talk about this, right? Like
right.
Don't talk about the fact that we sit around and play with little guys in a room and yada yada. So yes, that was it. And it really, to me, it was funny because the game side of it didn't really take off for me. I enjoyed the time hanging out, but I'd rather be outside, playing guns, riding skateboards, whatever. But the miniatures is what stuck. There were the Ralpartha, the Grenadier, these white metal miniatures that we would get that represented your cleric in the Dungeons and Dragons deal. And I just love the miniature. I love the idea at the time of this little avatar of my imagination on the table. And for me, it was, I probably sat and touched and held, moved in the hex paper and all the stuff that, more than I paid attention to any stories they ever told.
Sure.
And then it was just, hey, eventually, I think Matt was his name. He probably showed up with a miniature that was actually painted. And then that took off. I don't think there was a time where I ever stared at one of the plain metal miniatures and thought, wow, I should paint this. I think it was that he dropped one that had been painted that he bought from like the bookstore or whatever. And he put it on the table and I was like, okay, now that makes it real. And I had to do that. And so then I started painting, and then it just launched off into whatever game I could get my hand on back then. There weren't too many, right? BattleTech was the first game that I ever really started collecting the miniatures to paint and play. So, and then it just kind of went from there.
So all those like old minis, like my wife is a little younger than you, but you know she's about 10 years older than me. So she has all of those like little old white metal minis,
Yeah.
and we dug them out of her old Crown Royal bag with
Yeah.
all of her dice and everything. And I was one shocked because they're smaller than the stuff now,
Oh yeah.
and I was like, this was all hand sculpted, and it's all monocast. It is you know, such a weird like artifact, because like, you know, Games Workshop and things have always been a little bit more complex, a little bigger. And to think that like this little tiny Gandalf, like, you know, it's like maybe 25 mil tall, you know, it's
Maybe I was gonna say 20. I was gonna say like 20 mil, right?
yeah,
It feels like when I find them, they are really small. And it's funny because even Citadel miniatures originally, because one of the first packs or like boxes of miniatures I got was Chaos Warriors, and people I don't think realize or don't realize like how old these things are. And I can't remember if they were making them or if it was being made by Grenadier or Citadel with Stone. I can't remember all the nuances of who and how they got in, but there was a box and it was the little squat Chaos dudes, one piece, same size like you're talking about, had the little nipple on their forearm that a plastic shield fit over. The plastic shield had a hole in the middle of it. You put it over the
right,
nipple, and the nipple became the little metal part in the center of the shield. And so I
yeah,
had all those, and of course those were fun. I had no idea what they were for because they weren't really D&D oriented. They weren't really anything at the time in my head. I just like by that point I was off and running. It was miniatures. I bought them. I painted them. You know, that was my allowance money, and you go. But yeah, it is funny to look at how the scale has changed, and I think that's very indicative of the fact that these are fewer, or I guess the shared role of Avatar on the battlefield, whatever the battlefield is, board game or 6x4 or whatever, and also the hobby, the painting and the building has become and grown its own legs, whereas back then I think that was probably the most obscure portion of it, right? These are avatars for us to do these crazy imaginative games. Yes, some people paint them and such, but it wasn't really the norm. There weren't products, there weren't you know, places to go where people painted. I can, and it's funny, I think it, as I was growing up, the books, I mentioned the bookstore, there was a bookstore, and it just so happened that the guy that was the manager of the bookstore loved to paint miniatures. So that was the only place that I had ever seen that had a case of metal miniatures all painted for different things. Battletech, there's probably some Starfleet battle, Star Trek stuff, and, you know, various random assortment of dudes. And the guy just loved to paint, you know, and so he painted these models, and it blew me away because you could go to the hobby store and they didn't even sell the stuff, right? You know, nowadays you talk about the hobby store, and the hobby store doesn't sell plastic models and railroad trains, right? It's flipped on its head. But back then it was like what we were talking about. Dungeons and Dragon modules were like, you could only find them at like college bookstores. They weren't at the big bookstores. They weren't at the hobby stores. It was just a very, very niche thing. So,
were you using like craft paints, like apple barrel paints to paint your models? Or because if I remember right, you said your mom was an artist who painted. So was she a part of that at all?
my mom never painted. My grandmother painted, and my mom was more of a hands-on. She makes jewelry, so but I was always around that creativity. But no, unfortunately, you know, acrylics weren't a thing. Like we say craft paint, but back then that wasn't a thing that I know of. Somebody might come forth and say, "Of course they did," but I don't know.
Yeah,
it was all enamels, right?
Right.
At the hobby store, like growing up painting models and plastic kits, because you know, prior to miniatures, I built model airplanes and stuff like that. My dad was big into models, and you know, so I knew about that world and was starting to grow my legs at having fun. But I didn't really like probably building the kits much then, you know? And
sure.
But all the paints were enamels, spray lacquers, and the testers, little square or rectangular cubic glass bottles with the top, and they were enamels, right? And so I would sit in my room back in the day when nobody cared, just huffing enamel fumes all day long, right? Just pounding paint out, man. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing at all. I was trying to thin them with water, and then you're like, no, you got to have the lacquer thinner and enamel thinner and white spirits, and so now you're huffing white spirits, and my room was just a concoction of every fume known to man. You know, I probably blew away all my notable brain cells before I even got a chance to use them. But yeah, I mean, that was it. And then, you know, acrylics, like I said, the products around this world of non-toxic, you know, better flowing, easier to use, that's arguable. But, you know, that didn't really start happening for quite a long time.
Yeah, well, it seemed like like Citadel GW was kind of the first big push trying to like get their things available to people. I remember, I think it was 90, I'm trying to remember, 94. I was first introduced to Warhammer Fantasy, and there was this family that had like all of these like fantasy, like, dragons and stuff that were like all pewter, white metal stuff. And they wanted to show me, because I was like playing Magic the Gathering at the time, like if I still had all those old cards, they would be worth a small fortune. But they're like they had the Wheel of Doom that was like a Skaven thing, and they had bought it, and they were like showed me the photo of like what like the heavy metal painting was then versus like in real life what they had. And I remember it just being like 3 colors of like a brown, a red, and a green. There was no gradient, there was no nothing. And I remember being like fascinated by that era of stuff and like just the weight of it all. And then when I went to my mom, I was like, I think I got to get some of this stuff. And she saw the prices of them, and she's like,
Nope.
no, that's not happening. You can still play Magic. It's $1 a booster pack. Again, right. I really wish that I still had that old Magic stuff.
Yeah. No. I sold a lot of my old Magic stuff for a ridiculous. I just found a bunch of original dual lands in a box when we were cleaning out my storage. So according to some of the War Machine guys I was talking to, I've got thousands of dollars in this little box. So good. That's nice.
Yeah.
I'll sell this. But
there's there's a really good what's it called? The PBS show where they get all the antiques. Antique Roadshow. That's what it's called. They had their first thing of like the alpha and beta set, and it was like, I want to say it was like $170,000. They said it was going to be worth, and like those dual lands were like $1,000 a piece, and I was just like, oh my god, I had so much of that stuff. And
funny aside is my buddy of mine back east bought a comic shop when the owner passed away, and he bought all the comic shop, and in the basement, all the stores and stuff back east have got basements, and so in the basement he found a bunch of like water damage, just moisture collecting in the basement stuff. But he found some boxes, and he found they didn't have sealed boxes the same way back then, but he found in the original packaging some alpha, beta, and unlimited stuff that was just absolutely incredible. Because like the old alpha, it was all printed wonky, like the corners were weird because they didn't have the offset print wasn't correct and all of that. So it was just crazy. He made a fortune on that one. It basically paid everything he bought the store for just by finding that box.
My god.
But you're right. Like with miniatures, it was funny because the price back then, we'd laugh at it now, right? Because if we look at what we pay for miniatures in our hobby now, we'd laugh and say, "What do you mean a whole box of miniatures was $20? Right. It was $15, $11.99." But back then, that was expensive for a kid, because you're talking about, at least for me, like, in the 90s still that's pretty expensive, but for me in like the 80s it was like, well, no, because you can buy me like a plastic toy gun from the grocery store for $1, and that thing will last me like a year, dude. Like a water gun was like golden. I was like, right. I don't need much, and my imagination took over. So yeah, it was a big broad jump from that to being able to get into these other adult-ish toys, right? It sounds funny to say that, but because these weren't really built for kids. And I was drug into it by a guy who was older than me by the time I hit high school, he had long graduated. So I got very lucky that someone who was already in that kind of older nerddom, was kind of had nobody else to play with, so played with the kids in the neighborhood and probably hated it the whole time, but probably sucked his soul out. But at the end of the day, it was really fun to think about. And it took me, doing more chores and getting more, allowance money and saving it up to buy one miniature and have fun and play around with it. So I do remember that slog. And, then when I found Games Workshop and 40K and fantasy, and it was a total different deal. It's like, oh, wait a minute. There's this whole new world of gaming that takes the BattleTech thing to a whole nother level. BattleTech was all like 4 or 5 miniatures that you played with in a lance.
Right.
And it was simple. You could, for the days where I could buy 4 miniatures, paint them, and have my army. Right.
Right. So when did you get to that point where like the hobby actually became something that like had a future in it for you? Because you don't ever just go from like high school into and now I am making paintbrushes. Like they're and almost all of us seem to have times where when we're out of the hobby, for a period of time.
Yeah. The you have your life discovery points, right? Everybody does, and you can label them whatever you want to, right? You can discover girls, boys, sports, music, whatever. I happen to have discovered sports, music, and girls all around the same time. And I've always been very focused on, when I see something that is cool and involving, and you can immerse yourself in it like that, whether it be playing hockey or painting miniatures or whatever. It was always like, all right, I'm doing this. You jump in with both feet. And so there are times where the hobby wasn't one of those that you chose to jump in, and I think everybody goes through that. I know for me there was a big dearth of hobby through the late 80s to early 90s as music really kicked off for me. I went through and toured and then started my record company, and so that was my hobby of choice to make my passion. When all of that kind of rolled up in the kind of the mid to late 90s, I guess. Yeah, because it would have been about 99, I guess, when all of that kind of finally subsided for me. And then it was funny because right at that time, I got back into comics. I got back into card games. And then at my buddy's store that I was talking about in Pennsylvania, they had Warhammer. And, I had painted some models and had thought it was really cool and had all my models in boxes on the shelf. And so right before the 2000s, I got back into it, pretty heavy. And it was funny because my wife at the time was like, wow, this is weird. You didn't ever tell me you did this, And I'm like, it's great, isn't it? And she just doesn't understand. So
sure.
It's funny because you have that recessive nerd gene that can be tucked away for a while as you do other things, right? Grow your business, get a job, get married, do whatever, raise a family. But eventually I think that if you have a love for that type of all-in-one hobby, right? It's collecting, it's doing, it's building, it's being creative, and it's playing. So it ticks a lot of the boxes. And then when I got back into it in the late 90s and then onward into the early 2000s, it's kind of been off and running. I worked for Games Workshop for quite a while at the early 2000s in the upper office stuff. And then when I left there, you could say that the hobby took another dip for me from about 2007 to 2010, I guess, for about 3 years. I got everything together and had to go off into the old industry that I had done before. And then after that, once I got back into it, I said, you know what, I need to find a way to make this passion, something that we can turn into at least enough of a side hustle that, that it can be worth, it can basically pay for itself, right? A lot of the things that I do, I'm like, if I can have this hobby that's fun, because none of them are cheap, right? Then if I can do enough hustle on the side to pay for itself, then it's a win-win. And then the problem is just keeping it balanced to where, the hustle side of it doesn't make you hate the hobby side of it.
Right. So to come back around, you said you did bands and toured and ran a record label. Like, what sort of stuff did you do? Because like that's where I high school,
your recording gear in the background there.
Yeah, like I've got all my synth stuff and things, and like a wall of guitars over here. I totally neglected my nerd stuff for many years trying to get a band going. Unfortunately, I had way more fun like drinking and doing drugs, and so I didn't actually like get anything done with it. But I had a great time while doing it. So like, what were you doing there? What type of music was it?
So I started playing in punk rock and hardcore bands way back in the 80s, and then as you go through high school and your garage band phase, and a couple of bands get noticed, and we got noticed in Dallas a little bit, and then I started touring with a buddy of mine out of California. This is back in the days when there was still no internet. That's all.
Right.
So it was all pen pal stuff. But as bands would come through town, I would, meet and hang out with the bands, and, you're reading the newsprint, rags. Maximum Rock and Roll was the big one back then. And so, just through all the pen pals through music, got to know people. I played guitar, I sang, and just started up in a band called Solitude with some guys from a bunch of other notable hardcore bands back in the day in California. Toured with those guys, and then started playing guitar for random touring bands that were just roaming around and needed an extra guitar because back, this wasn't a full-time gig, so
Sure.
you had to ask off to go on tour, right? You had to get off from your job, so it's like,
Right.
whatever you were doing, you had to be like, well, can I have a month or a week to go on this tour? And a lot of times no was the answer. So you had bands always look different, except for probably the lead singer and, one other person. A lot of bands would come through and you'd be like, well, that's not the guy on the album. But so I was one of those guys that wasn't on the album for a long time. And then I started producing, and then, it led into all sorts of music from there. I produced everything from, like, we used to call it acid jazz and trip hop, and then hip hop and all sorts of stuff. I became fairly notable as a beat maker for people that wanted to buy beats. We did all sorts of crazy stuff out of the studio, but I had a full-on recording studio. My first business was building recording studios. So,
dude, that was such a hard time for recording because, like, you were breaking out of tape and getting into the computerization of stuff, and none of that software was good. It was remarkable, but it was a nightmare to use. Like, I remember seeing some of it, like, after the fact, because by the time I was way into it, it was started to be something that, while still not consumer grade, like, it was so much more flexible. Like, I recorded my first little EP in high school on like using SoundForge or something.
sure.
And I was like thrilled that, like, I could get a stereo sound out of it. I was like, I can have two channels. This is crazy. And, like bouncing things into like one big, mono disgusting sound. And it's so funny to think about, like, how that industry has changed over the years to like what we have now. It's absurd. Like, I'm helping some friends work in music and learn like synths, because like this whole synthwave revolution's really got a lot of people's imaginations again. And I'm like trying to figure out, like, how much do you want to get into it? Do you want to go hardware? Do you want to go digital? And
Right.
it's amazing how accessible everything is now, because, man, the 90s, I thought we were going to have to like go to our first, like, pay for an actual recording studio to cut our first thing, of which nobody around us wanted, the shitty punk band called the Unabombers to go and like to play. And so, like, we
between the line stuff, right? We used to go, like, as kids, we'd have to go and find the second tier recording engineer that wanted to work on a Sunday when everybody else was gone home. That was how he survived, because he didn't get to do anything except make coffee runs and patch bay connections on all of the big act times. And so we got snuck in basically on Sundays and charged the same rate for a guy that was half, so some of the people were really good, but it was weird, right? Because it was, coming from a kind of a very niche of a niche kind of music that wasn't, at least for us in the 80s and 90s, wasn't considered to be important at all. And we were trying to be important, but weren't capable, right? You're not going to get shows. Our shows were, if we had 400 people at a show, you thought you had made it. Like, where's my Grammy?
Right.
And so, we went through all that. But, it's funny because I always find parallels in everything, and I feel like that progression through music, where you went from analog and then into digital sequencing and then digital recording and then digital mastering and digital, production, to where you didn't need analog at all anymore, obviously, is we're seeing that right now through miniatures too, right? We're seeing this move from the ability to, and I've seen it firsthand because I was there at GW when they started moving into the digital sculpting realm, as opposed to just standard 3-ups done with clay. And so that technology was really cumbersome at the time, but was revolutionary. It was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And now we've seen the exact same thing happen with our world of hobbying and miniatures that happened in music. It's almost a direct corollary. You have everybody now being able to at least have the opportunity, if you have an imaginative sense and you want to create, you can get a software package. You can buy ZBrush. It's not super prohibitive to buy into these things. And you can then start to learn to sculpt, and you never really have to have the same lead up time, I guess, and that's not a bad thing to say. But now you can go and find a repository of assets, like here's a human torso, and you can use that as the starting place for your sculpt. So if you don't know anatomy very well, it's not as big a hindrance as it used to be, because now you can get someone else's knowledge of anatomy the same way you can pull someone else's knowledge of drumming and pull a drum loop down, and now you don't have to have a drummer in your band necessarily, or you can just fine tune it to match your your wants. I know that for me personally, part of the biggest problem with a band is that it's a lot of people together all having to head in the same direction, and so herding cats is very difficult. And so I think art in general has kind of, I think, benefited. I know a lot of people we could argue about it for days, that it's also, there's bad parts to it as well, because now you don't have to know anatomy to sculpt the thing, and I get that. But I think overall we're seeing these big bounds where now more creativity can get unleashed, and we're seeing more miniatures. We see it in our world because every day there's a new miniature, there's a new miniature company, there's a new thing. And I think that's amazing. It means that there will be more that makes it through to the end game, right? And whatever that means.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely a believer in the rising tide, raises all ships, and I know that there's that whole weird, closed off thing, like in the music industry, specifically out in Oregon, as we had a couple bands, get big out of Oregon. If you walked into a Guitar Center there, it was silent. Nobody wanted to play on like a guitar there because they're afraid anybody was going to steal like their riff, because all, we were under a microscope. And at the time, I think like the Decemberists and stuff like that were really starting to explode. And none of us, like punk guys, we were like totally screwed. Like we were never going to be looked at. We didn't have a violin player and we didn't wear stupid hats. So like we were totally screwed. But like in that DIY scene though, like we found like weird bands of like 14-year-old kids that would like show up at our shows, and their dads would be like, these guys are pretty good, and we're like, let's do a show with them. And we would have like these weird bizarre shows and trying to get going. And like I know that like while none of us made a dime doing any of that, like we were like training a younger generation to be resourceful and do these things. And I'm seeing that kind of now where like the Patreon world is definitely leveling a playing field that some people are just not ready to play in. And while I do see maybe not enough originality, it seems like a lot of people are trying to like say, no, this is my brand, I need to be X and I need to be bigger. And I think that is inspiring new people to look at it, I mean, just like with what you guys, with what Creature Caster did for mini acts like Duchess Mini, like that is something that was an idea that, I haven't seen something like this in this size. I want this. We need to make this happen. And it's amazing that DIY thing, can even apply to you guys, where I look at, Creature Caster Monument as being this thing of like, these guys are going to be fucking huge. like if they are already like this huge pillar in the community, and they're doing this now, like watch out. Like this is unbelievable to me. And so it's so cool seeing you guys taking risks like that, and being a part of it, but also protecting your brand. Like it doesn't seem like anything you guys have ever done is a step like backwards. Like, and I've heard you say that in stream, like, I could do this thing, but what's the point? There's other people who do it and they do it just fine. So why spend the time and the resources to do that? And I find that really refreshing, because it just seems like that like complete like blue ocean, when you're reaching for everything, you are the master of nothing. And I love that you guys are like, this is what we do, this is our brand, deal with it.
Yeah, I know with the hobby side, we try to focus and make sure that everything we do is the right answer, right? And a lot of times the hardest thing as a developer of anything, right? I don't care if you're developing software, hardware, books, whatever you're making, is to first identify what hole you're filling, right? Is it doesn't mean that there has to be a hole, But generally you want to find it, right? And say, why am I doing this? Am I doing it just because I love it? That's great, but usually it means that, there's something that you're trying to fill there, right? And it's a need of other people to enjoy what you enjoy. Sometimes it's that easy. And I think I am a firm believer, let the people that are really good at what they do what they do. And there's times where you want to compete. Competition is good. And there's times where you want to look at it and say, my energy is best spent elsewhere. Again, going back to the music side of things, when it got to a point in bands that I knew that this was too much banging of my head against a wall for the return on the effort, I said, well, but I do these recording studios. I went to school for physics and wave engineering for acoustic sciences. And so coming out of that, I wanted to build recording studios. And unfortunately, the timing was kind of bad because as the transition to digital was happening, recording studios were less and less in demand for building big A and B rooms and such. And that's really where I missed my love of that by about 2 decades. But we still had fun. We still built a lot of environments, and it started being that, producers were doing it in their homes. And so we're going in and helping builders design these things in homes. And, we got to do a lot of really cool work, but I had to constantly reevaluate because of the changing industry at that point and my changing role within that industry based on what I wanted to have fun with as to what hole am I trying to fill? Because you can bang your head against the wall and you can say, I'm going to fill this hole when there's no hole. Somebody else has already filled it. So you're trying to do something that has already been done and there's nobody left that needs it. And so you have to be very careful as a business person, let's just say. And at that sense, no matter what level you're at, you had to kind of move and go in directions that were new. So I started a record label saying, okay, well, what's the problem? The problem is that none of my friends in the music industry can make any forward progress because of the way the industry works. So what can we do? So we built a doorway for people. And I worked with Kenny Laguna and Joan Jett from Joan Jett and the Blackhearts.
Sure.
To do my record label and got an imprint on Blackheart Records and use that as a way to bring up my family of friends and get their records distributed without having to sell their soul through a full-on record deal. We could do distribution deals. We were very flexible because I was like, I just want to help people. I need to make enough money to make it to where I can help another person, but we're not trying to glom on. Now, unfortunately, the record industry doesn't allow you to do that, so it doesn't work very well. So over time, I just kind of was beating my head against a rock again and eventually left that industry because there were no more holes to fill that I felt like I was qualified to fill in a manner that was going to attract people to it. With the hobby, the same thing is that you look at it and you say, what holes are there that need filling? And as a painter of decades and decades, I would always look at my own tools and say, hey, what is it that I do that I find myself having to work through so much frustration to get good results? And that's where it all started. We made brushes because I don't like artist brushes. I don't like canvas brushes for painting miniatures. When we paint three-dimensional objects, it's a totally different deal than painting on a flat surface. And brushes are made for flat surface painting. So we said, okay, well, what can we do? With limited resources and limited reach in an industry of art supplies, how can we make partnerships? And so it really became, let's befriend the people that know what they're doing. Let's start talking with them and identifying the need in our industry and see if we can get anybody to hook on to what we're doing and work with us as a small business. And so the biggest thing was finding partners that could bring their expertise to the table and help me develop products that filled the holes for hobbyists. And so, it's not as much, glorious mad scientist in a workshop as people like to think it is. A lot of times it's a lot of phone calls, it's a lot of emails, it's a lot of business dealings saying, hey, I love what you do. Have you ever thought about this? And being hung up on, no. I've been told by so many companies in the art supply world that what you do isn't art, that it's just become a meme at this point. Miniature painting is not art. I need to make the t-shirt. But the reality is it is, and we're really working hard to do things that I believe are important for miniature painters, to have them work less on, our kind of tongue-in-cheek thing is spend less time off the model and more time on the model, right? And the off the model part is the dicking around on the palette and the doing this cleaning thing and all of this nonsense. And put your products, you open them up, put them to use, paint awesome models, go have fun. And so I feel like that's, if we have a hole, that's our hole, and that's a broad hole because there's tons of stuff in our hobby that can, be thrown in that hole. And so that's where we're working. So it's been a lot of fun. It's finally putting, I think at age 50, coming full circle and saying, you know what, screw all this. I'm going to spend time doing what I love and find a way to do it from both ends. Continue to paint, enjoy, and play and roll dice and do all the things that I've loved as a nerd my whole life. and also then monetize that passion through a business that makes sense with the relationship for all the customers out there. And it's people like you, right? Getting to meet people like you, like you said, at Warfare Weekend, getting to hang out and seeing the way that not only we conduct business, but how I hope that it comes across that we just love this business, right? I love being on both sides of the booth table. I love talking to the people that are making new stuff. It was great getting to talk with the Judgment guys when I was there. Privateer Press and I are really great friends, so all those guys are always a blast to hang out with. But it's I love being both sides of the fence, right? I'm a consumer, I'm a hobby nerd. I love to find the latest, greatest thing. I love to paint it. I love to play the game and try it out, roll the dice. And I also love being on the side where I have people asking me how to paint the thing and what they need to use, and then being able to be looked at as a resource of information where they actually listen to what I say, which is a miracle unto itself. So it's a lot of fun.
You were definitely the triple threat, and I realized that really quick when I first talked with you, that whether or not the term salesman, it comes with so many negative connotations, but you are so good. I mean, like, if it wasn't for the fact that I can't remember people's names to save my fucking life, I would use this gift of gab to try to be a politician, because it seems like I can remember things about people that are super important to them. And I was watching you do the same thing, and it's like, man, if this is our future politicians, this is the shit that makes me fucking happy, because I'm seeing a guy that is a first time at this convention. And, I have been using your guys' models and paints to play this Warhammer 40K Escalation League, of which, because Warhammer isn't at Warfare Weekend, none of the Warhammer players knew about it, which was really sad. And that I'm using your model, the King of Ecstasy out there as a keeper of secrets, and people were like, what the hell is that? And I'm like, dude, these guys are gonna be here. You cannot miss this. It's worth the price of admission just to see these things in person, because the internet, it's so hard to get that really how special all this stuff is across, because there's a million different companies out there, and there's a lot of white noise, and there's a lot of people who've been doing it for a long time, and there's a lot of bias and fandom that is always hard to break through. And so it was so cool seeing people, as I was downstairs with my monument bag, and I'm sitting there painting, and everybody's like, oh, what are you using? And I'm like, dude, just go upstairs and buy some. I think I probably sold 20 pucks of brush cleaner by the end of the weekend for you guys, because I was seriously, they're like, how come your brushes are so good? I was like, it's Jen's brush cleaner, go get some. Get it while you can, get it now. And it was just so exciting to see all that. But I remember when I first got into the hobby, because I'm still pretty new into the actual miniature hobby, it was just called Slow Fuse, and there was this neon green website that never had anything in stock, and I was like, I want to use these things. People keep on talking about how good this is, and of course then it became Monument Hobbies, and your supply chain seems to be much more stable. But how did that develop? Because it seems you did the things that weren't the sexy part of the hobby, but it's the stuff that all of us need. It's the stuff that's in our hand 24/7, and it's right in front of you the entire time, which I really respect.
Well, for us, it was really it started as Slow Fuse Gaming, right? And that actually came out of the Twitch stream, right? I've been streaming now for 7 years, I guess.
Oh, wow.
And so, as we moved the Twitch stream away from the video game content and into the hobby content, was a big deal. It lost all of our viewership almost, right? Because obviously those are two totally different worlds. There's still a handful of people that are very big on our Twitch channel that have been there for a lot of the whole ride, but very few, because and you can expect that people like what they like, and when you change from doing what they like, you can't expect them to stick. Sure. But we took the risk. It was part of that. I'm going to do this. I'm tired of one thing. I want to get back into what I do and have this not be just a behind the scenes thing, because when you start spending your daytime if you go to a job and you spend your time working, and then you come home and you have family time, or however your life is built, going out with friends or whatever, and then you find yourself sneaking your hobby into the times in between. And so for me, it was like, well, let's get rid of some of these things and make the hobby part of your daily, what you do. And so we, by converting the stream over to a hobby stream, we've been doing that now for a little over 4 years of that 7. So that's great. And,
wow.
And very early on realized that, okay, well, the stream takes a lot of effort. And you want to try to get some return on it. I knew I wanted to try to, again, monetize this passion of mine and be able to ride that fine line of love, hate, so you don't get tired of it. And so I started initially because I've been a product developer for my entire career, whether it was in audio and engineering, or music and creating music, or in electronics. And I've got patents for electronic devices. And so it's like, I've always wanted to make new stuff. And so in this industry, I just started filling holes. Like I said, it was like, okay, what do we need? We need to, let's make some brushes. And then, it was, well, these, if you want to take care of your brushes, you need a brush soap. And believe it or not, Masters Brush Cleaner, New Jersey pencil company, was one of the first that told me that miniature painting wasn't an art, and they didn't want to work with. It's funny. It's like they shot themselves in the foot, because Jen's Drunken Brush Goop came from the fact that we really wanted to sell Masters brush soap, but we wanted them to alter the formula for us to work with the types of brushes and for the types of things we do. And they just poo-pooed it. Obviously, we're small. We get it. It's not like everybody's going to just say yes,
Sure.
But they went to the other extreme and were like, well, that's not an art form. And I was like, oh, okay, then. Well, I'm a rebellious turd. And so I'm like, well, we're going to show you. And we're never going to show them. I mean, that's just my ego, right? It's like, no,
Sure.
Masters is never going to even register that we exist. But the idea is that it showed us that, okay, well, nobody's filling this hole. We need to fill this hole, come out with an all-in-one solution that really works, that's made by people that use it, that look at it every day. And that then extends to everything we do, right? Yeah. My desk is cluttered and I can't keep it organized because I'm a dirty boy like everybody else, and I'm just it's whatever. It's not covered with dirt, but it's just always in the wrong place.
Sure.
And so how can I fix this in a way that makes sense? And so we built our modular rack system. And then, brushes, and then paint was funny. Paint was another one that started out with, what's the problem with white paint in the hobby? It sucks. Nobody can make an acrylic white that works worth a crap, that doesn't cost a fortune. And so I said, I can do this. And so we did it on stream. I mixed it live on stream, I think, or maybe I mixed it off stream, but showed people because it was funny. I remember it to the day. It's a funny story we tell that Forge World, the Eidolon, the first captain of the Emperor's Children model from the Horse Heresy line, right? And we're painting it for a viewer, and I'm doing his white cloak, and it's just fighting it the whole time. And I'm like, I don't know why I do this. I'm trying to use Vallejo paint. I was like, I don't know why I fight this. I know white is horrible. I've done it in the past and made my own. I'm just going to make my own. Made my own, sprayed it. Wonderful the first time. Everybody in chat was, ooh, that's great. And I was like, well, we need to do this. So we started hand mixing white paint. And that's where the whole ProAcryl line came from, was our need to create a paint that worked better for what we do and the way we do it. And it all started with me getting frustrated with the fact that hobby white sucks. And, so we did that, and the community kind of forced our hand, because it was like, hey, you do this really well. The white, you mentioned stuff not being in stock. The white paint couldn't stay in stock because we'd make it, but we're making it like in our garage witch's brew style. And we can't make, 5 million bottles of it. So, and each bottle was was totally funny. It was like no label. We hand wrote on it. It was just, it was kind of a feel good thing, right? You just knew you were getting something special. And so we called it Special White. But the people were like, we need red. We want a purple. How come you can't make a brown? Why don't you just make a whole paint line? So we started. And now it's just taken off, right? Because now we've gotten to the point where we're making thousands of bottles of paint, right? We're making the paint ourselves. We're mixing and bottling ourselves. It's become a manufacturing issue. So it's not just let's source a product and brand it ourselves. Now we're actually being able to take it to that next step. And so naturally out of that come all of the other things, like, okay, well, we've made this, but I see people asking for this, so we changed the bottle lid on our paints because we see the response. And then we add more bottle lids so you can have more choices for the lids for your paints. And then we've got new products coming out. I'm working on 6 new products right now that are not products that we make right now. So, hopefully we'll see those by the end of the year. So it's just a constant kind of environment around here that spurs creativity, not just in the art that we do, but in the things that we make.
Sure.
And that's the part that keeps it fun for me, is that my day in the office is spent seeing where the holes are again, the potholes in the road, and how we're going to fill this pothole, and let's figure this out. So sometimes it happens, and sometimes you wind up on the back of a napkin drawing a go bag, and then you try to find partners that'll make the go bag, and now you have a product that everybody loves, and then we just refine that product. So we're not trying to make everything, but we will be increasing the line to include things that we as artists want and need, I think is the goal.
Do you think you guys will do any fluorescence or anything like that in the ProAcryl line? Because that seems to be like, fluorescent paint's so fucked up because it's so, what is it, non-fugitive? Like, it's not built to last. Like, the pigments are they will fade.
Yeah, they fade. And they're not UV resistant, so it right. steps outside of the normal line of how we make acrylics and how the pigmentation works. Because you don't find like a fluorescent pigment naturally, right? You have to do this chemical process to create these pigments, and that doesn't survive the test of time. It looks really good for, and we're not super worried about it as manufacturers, because the things that we paint don't sit in windowsills generally, and don't. Right. It's not like painting your house and worrying about UV paint, fading on your house or on your car. So we do have the luck of the draw on being able to do it. We don't even worry about it as much as like canvas paint, right? I mean, you've seen oil paintings survive for thousands of years, it seems, and right. They just have to be touched up. So is there a chance? Sure. I won't ever say never to anything. I feel like, again, though, we kind of know the lay of the land and where we want to be with the line. ProAcryl, I think we've proven that what we've tried to do is create a line that isn't, probably won't have 500 colors. We're not trying to create a triad for every hue. We're really trying to look at making a paint that allows people's creativity to take them where they want it to take them. And we get response in chat and email all the time with people saying, before I got your paint line, I never wanted to mix paints because I was always afraid and the paints don't work. And just by the nature of how hobby companies make their acrylic paints, a lot of them don't mix well. So we made a paint that when you mix it, it's great and you can have fun, and it's like a kid finger painting again. And so people now, we find them going, I mix all the time now. And that doesn't preclude us from making more colors. But, fluorescence I've had my eye on. If we can find a way, like everything we do, if we can find a way to make it better, then yeah, I would say I'd be excited to come out with a few colors. Our transparents were a good indication of that, right? It was like, if we can make a way to get a filtering paint that is better than what you'll find out on the market out, then I have no problem doing what I would call more of an effect paint, right? Because I'm not huge on effect paints as a person, but I also don't want to just make products that are how Jason paints. Yeah. And so, I have to break outside of myself and say, okay, I know people really love this stuff. I don't ever use it, but that doesn't make it good or bad. That just means that I have to work harder to understand it, to make sure that what we make is delivering the right product to these people. So it takes me out of my comfort zone, which is always good as as an inventor and a creator and a manufacturer, is to kind of step outside yourself and be able to look at things from a different perspective, and then come up with something that might, again, the transparents are something that now I love them. Our metallics, I never really use metallic paint. Our metallics are freaking fantastic. I use metallic paints all the time now. So
yeah, they're so fast, and that's the things that, like, the ProAcryl line has made my just everyday painting, getting things to tabletop, the random commission that I have, instead of me like fudging my hours and being like, I didn't just spend 4 or 5 hours on this, like, I can do some of these things in one pass, and I'm always thrilled by how it mixes, because I've always been a paint mixer. That's one of the things that I really enjoy doing. And so seeing how the ProAcryl line works like that, and especially when you have like these new painters, I'm like, just start here and you'll never have to like learn how to do everything again. But I fought against the grain for like 2 years before I landed on your guys' paint, and I almost had to relearn how to paint, because like I couldn't thin it down enough, because I was used to everything else. Like, you put like a little bit of like matte medium and water in there and you're already like completely ghosted out paint. Right. And this, like, you have to like you have to work to break the paint, which is really remarkable, especially in things on like red.
Yeah.
You're like, this should be impossible to get that thin and still have coverage. And it's amazing how much coverage you can still get out of it.
That's awesome that you see it. Yeah, I mean, because the big thing is that, you know, we as hobbyists use paint in so many different ways. You know, it's amazing to me that acrylics have such flexibility to do all these, whether you want to airbrush, you want to wet blend at full volume of the paint, you want to thin it down to near breaking for glazing and filtering, you know, everything that you want to do. The problem is a lot of those things don't want the same paint, you know? And so when we started looking at this, is there a miracle way that we can make like a silver bullet? I hate that term, right? Because it's
Sure.
No paint does everything, but we got as close as we could. That it literally just says yes. You know, if you want to throw our paint at a particular technique that you're comfortable with, like you said, you may have to relearn a little bit of how paint responds, because other paints that you used either thin quicker or take longer or whatever. But once you figure out our paint, it just says yes, it'll work in all those situations.
Yeah.
And people always joke with me because I just use dirty tap water for everything I do. I don't use any mediums. I don't use anything. And so I'm like, it works great. I just use water, but it works doubly well with all of the products that are specifically built for the task at hand. I probably make it harder than I need to, but that's why that's why I feel so secure with it, because I know that I beat the crap out of the paint, you know, in every way you're not supposed to, and can't get it to, you know, perform horribly. So.
Right. The only things that I've ever had issues with are the transparents, and it's because they're kind of too good. Like they are like so pigmented and so
They're
strong.
really vibrant.
Like it like, and getting them like I used on my Resin Beast entry for this year, like I took photos. You did the online thing, which I really appreciate you like taking the time to look at every model. But like I did my twins, and the capes, you know, were like red, and I couldn't get the photo to not reflect the red off the surface. Like the transparents, like in person, there's texture, and like it did all like the stupid micro texture brush strokes underneath it, and I was like, I can't get a photo of this good enough to where you can see those, because the red is so vibrant, which is
cameras hate filtering in general, right? Because it creates almost an iridescence, the way the physical pigment overlaps. Unless the camera is at the right angle, it doesn't even see all those layers done. So, you know, that's they're not friendly for you when you're trying to make that stuff happen. But at the end of the day, they really are. And we wanted a really vibrant paint, and it fools a lot of people, because when they see transparent in the name, they think wash. And so they think, well, all my washes are, you know, like just right out of the bottle that's I use. And like, you know, I hope nobody picks up our transparents and just slaps it on the model, because they'll be very disappointed with how the model just changes color entirely. But once you add that one drop of water to them, then they're like, oh my God, this is just incredible. You know, so.
Yeah, they do some pretty good work for you. Do you think washes are ever something in your future that you will tackle? Is that even?
We've thought about it, because of the fact that people on stream and in behind the scenes ask me all the time how to use the transparents in particular as washes. And so I teach them the flow improver trick. And so if you take 50% flow improver and 50% of the transparency, and you get amazing washes, and then you can mix your colors and make them. I would like to take that step out, so that, you know, you're not having to witch's brew on your own, because that's kind of the staple of our entire way that we do our product line, where it's probably a little bit further down the road. Again, I feel like, because when I want to use a wash for what a wash is, I grab Nuln Oil. I grab, you know, something that exists out there. And so, because I'm on the other side of the table as much as I am on the manufacturer side. And I'm like, these things work. These things are great paints. And so I have to make something that, to me, ups the game from that, right? There are certain things that, like Nuln Oil, is as great as it is, does horribly and creates problems. And so if I can fix those problems and create something that does the good parts without the bad parts, then you'll see us go down that road.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see those things, because like I've tried some contrast stuff, and of course, like I still use like the Nuln Oil. I actually use like the gloss versions of the GW washes a lot, because I think that I do a lot of like varnish coats, like a gloss coat of varnish, because I hate when you like use a wash on a model, specifically on like getting something tabletop and you hit like the cloak or something like that, and it stains your thing. You get that tea stain all over it, and you have to basically go back in and repaint the whole thing. And if whatever I can do to, like, if I get a gloss coat on there and then the gloss wash, it sinks into the recesses so much easier, and I get so much less of that coffee stain. Then I just go back over it with like aka ultramat, and that seems to really help the look of that, and cuts down so many steps. But it's like I'm always so frustrated when there's something that I think it's going to work the way it does, and I'm just like, damn it, that sucks.
Welcome to artwork.
Right.
This should work. It works all the time in other things. And then
yeah. Well, and even just your environment can be totally different. Like, you get a really humid day and things dry differently. I mean, like, I think that's one of my favorite parts of this, is like it's the everyday challenge of it. It feels so good to like creative problem solve every day on something that kind of resembles like a paint by numbers thing. Like, I don't have to like work on creating an image anymore. I have this cool thing in front of me to paint, and I have all these tools that can do that. And it's funny, I never really pictured myself as being like a total fanboy and just like, I'm gonna get everything that these guys have, and it just like I almost like say that you guys can do no wrong, but I've like really fell in that zone. Yeah, and so it's really interesting to see how you guys have taken over my hobby space almost completely.
Well, thank you for that, by the way. That's awesome. That kind of support is what keeps us going, right? It's like it's funny because I think as humans, we do what we do for a little bit of attaboy, right? You want to make sure that your efforts are recognized. And sometimes your own attaboy, like when you finish something and you can stare at it for hours and be like, that's awesome, whatever it is. Or you run your 5K and you place better. And so you don't care what anybody thinks. You just know you've impressed yourself. But I think for us, like, we as artists only put out products that we love. Right. And that's the first and foremost, is that if it has the Monument logo on it, it's going to be something that we use. And so then the bolster, the attaboy comes from, like, we've birthed this baby, we want to put it out there. And now someone like you comes back and says, dude, this is awesome, and that's where it's like, oh my God, it's such a relief. It's like, we love it. But is that just because of the way we paint? Is that just because of the colors we like? Is that just because of us? And then when the community has really responded the way it has, because the paints have only been out for about 1.5 years now.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's a lot longer than 1.5 years, the kind of traction and the kind of response and fan base that we have for it. And that keeps us going. Like I said, it makes a really cool symbiotic relationship with the community that allows us to take the feedback and work with it and know that the stuff that people are telling us is correct. With the bottle lids and all of that, as we changed the bottle, it was like, okay, we know we've got some deficiencies on this lid, and we're not afraid to admit it because we can fix them. It just takes a little bit of oil and grease in the machine at our end, and we're willing to do that because these people who love our products are saying that the only problem that they're running into is X, Y, and Z. And so if we can take away X, Y, and Z, then wow, I feel like that's a win for everybody. And being able to do that as a manufacturer is so refreshing, because I've worked at a lot of ends of industry where that's not a possibility. You don't get to take your fan base, if you want to call it that, your consumers that love your product, you don't get to always listen to them and show them that you're listening.
Right. It's really funny. There was one thing where, like, I'd been using your paints for a couple months, and I heard Scott Miniac say that he didn't like your paint bottles. They're too hard to squeeze. I was like, this guy's like totally weak, whatever, it's not that bad, whatever. And then I use these new bottles and I'm like, oh my God, they are so much easier.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it was funny because as a durometer of plastic, we had to be really careful because our first bottles that we got were so easy to squeeze that with the lid type that we enjoy, it was like, oh God, I know what the first complaint is, wow, I didn't really want half of my bottle of paint on the palette for today's painting session. And so, like, we went a little bit too far in the other direction, right? And we actually picked the same durometer of plastic that we use now, but we didn't realize that in the tighter confines of a smaller diameter bottle that it stiffens up. It's just physics.
Yeah.
the way of geometry and physics working together. But yeah, it's funny. Some things get fixed just without us really fixing them. We just made the box bigger like we wanted to originally, and then the ease of squeeze came with it.
That's so good. I'm glad that was like not a huge like, oh no, we have to redesign the whole thing, because like the bigger bottles it's really refreshing to get that much paint, especially coming from like I'm a picture framer. I buy like artist paint for stuff all the time for work. You know, I'm like, man, like artist paint, while yes it's expensive, you are getting generally a lot more, and especially like some of these GW pots are like 12 mil. I'm like, that's nothing, you know. It's so it's nice to see these, like, where are they now, 22 mil?
22, yep.
Yeah, so good. It's so good.
22. Yeah, our goal was always to be at that size. It was just unfortunate that along the first manufacturing run, the kind of tooling we had to do to redo the bottles, we had to make them our own bottle. There's just not a generic bottle that fit, and so we kind of had to go the generic route, because we were, to be honest, as a small business, we were like, are people gonna really want to buy another paint line? Of course. Do we really want to make 10,000 bottles of paint that nobody buys, you know? And have spent all the money to tool up to make our own bottle. But then it was literally like immediately when we brought the paints out, and a month later when they sold out and we thought we had a half a year's supply of paint, we were like, oops, we had no idea what we had on our hands. And it's nice as a manufacturer to kind of hit that proverbial home run, but it makes you scramble a little bit. And so we've been lucky that we did the right scrambling, I think, and now we're kind of locked in and it's back to kind of smooth sailing. We're working on new colors. We got primers that we're testing out right now. So
cool.
Primers will be one of the next big things you see from us. And then colors, I think with our expansion 3 colors, we've got 62 colors now. And that's a pretty comfortable spot for us to now start working on primers, mediums. We've got our matte medium will be coming out. Airbrush thinner or just thinner, and a floor improver is on the mark. So we've got, probably 8 or 9 bottle products that'll be hitting hopefully before the end of the year, that are kind of the what do you even call those utility paints, I guess we'll call them. They're the things that you need until you need them, that do the heavy lifting in the background. But yeah, we're constantly moving with the line. We're really stoked on today I'm sitting here working on the color swatches so we can do the kind of, hey, I painted this and I used these colors, and so we're coming out with the color swatches that allow our creators to very quickly tell people what colors they used on a model and things like that. So always something in the background going on with ProAcryl these days. It's awesome.
It's really cool, and I think getting it in the hands of people like Kenny of Next Level Painting, I think that's when I first saw him. I was like, damn, look at that. Once the content creators had it, I think it was all downhill. And that seems to be one of the coolest things about this hobby space, is that, like, from manufacturer to consumer, it's one step, a lot of the times. And so when you see it hitting and if it's a home run, it's instant, it's wildfire. And that is really inspiring, and so, like, when I see things like Kingdom Death do, like, they're like, new sale and they sell out of everything instantly, I'm like, how, like, there's no other industry that works like this, like very music rare. Is not the same, like art is not the same. That, like, this is really cool that that the it's usually the advertising causes the want, and in this one it's the need that causes the fire. And so it just seems like once something happens, it's just so fast and so complete, and it's just been really fun to watch. So how did you go from being, because you weren't always part of Creature Caster, that was, when did that all happen? Because that was a really interesting thing, because that was when I first wanted to buy your go bag, and then, like, your website was like broke for forever, and I was like checking back every week. I'm like, I'm gonna get this go bag, and I think I waited like almost a year before the purple one popped up, and I was like, and I'm getting the purple one. So the way this works is that there's Monument Hobbies and then there's Creature Caster. And as two individual companies, we chose early on to work together. With Slow Fuse Gaming, the idea was that the name wouldn't survive the progress.
because it was my Twitch name. It was not intended as a hobby name. It was intended as me playing World of Tanks, and all my streaming video games. So, that kind of just went, and it grew into what it is today, and people know us as Slow Fuse, and that's great. But we knew that wasn't what we wanted. As we started coming out with the brushes, all of the sables, the det cords, and everything, as they started coming out and had the Slow Fuse Gaming brand on them, we started finding from the community, kind of like with the paint lids, that people placed them on a level of initial quality and understanding with very introductory products because of the game in the name. It's a weird psychological effect, right?
Sure.
It's like it's a toy because it said gaming. And so it's a very valid marketing thing. It's very frustrating because you're like, I know it's true, but I don't want to rename everything, right? But we knew we needed to. And so at that time, we were looking at expanding into the full paint range and all of that. So from a business decision, it just made sense. We're going to come out with these paints. They're not going to be Slow Fuse Gaming paints. We need another brand. So we just said Monument. Boom. So now you have Monument. Other people involved, getting in touch with the guys from Creature Caster to do all this stuff and to start moving it that direction was great. But it's always been it's just that all the Monument products we decided to sell on the Creature Caster site because we felt like, as opposed to having two places to go, one you go get hobby products, one you get awesome models, it makes sense to kind of combine and have a one-stop shop, get some awesome models, paint your awesome models with these awesome paints.
Yeah.
And so it's helped both companies kind of increase their reach, and it's been a really great thing. But yeah, it has been confusing because we went very quickly from Slow Fuse Gaming to Monument, and then Monument wasn't on the Monument site anymore. It was on there because we still were selling. It was, there's no every excuse in the book, but the reality is that we still had lots of other products to sell from the Slow Fuse Gaming store where we sold, Army Painter and Vallejo and AK Interactive and all the products that we did that we showed on the stream. And as we started making those products on our own, we were like, okay, well, now we got to jump ship and do this thing. So it was a little confusing there for a little while. And it may be in the future because we're about to go to retail with Monument. And so you'll see Monument now has to kind of break away because the Creature Caster products won't go to retail. And we don't have people to say, oh, well, I'm a retailer of yours. I want, 15 Queen of Ecstasies, to sell in my store. And that's not going to happen. So, but all the paints, brushes, soaps, bags, racks, all of the products that we have will be going to retail this year, assuming COVID allows this to happen.
Sure.
But as soon as that's our big push for 2020 is to get into retail because we know it sucks to have your one bottle of paint you need to replace, have to pay shipping for that from the website. So we've got a really big network of retailers that are primed and ready to get the product as soon as we get the paint racks completed and all that stuff that has been slowed down because of our current situation. But
sure,
hopefully by end of the year, hopefully as we go into the Christmas rush, you'll be able to walk into your local FLGS and find all the great Monument stuff hanging on a rack. That'd be awesome.
Dude, that would be so cool because I always try to tell people just check out your the main colors that you're using in your army or whatever, and then I'm just like, you know what, buy a cool model and buy set one, you'll get free shipping and it's worth it. Hit that $150 mark. Yep. And then what's $150 in this hobby anymore? Just buy it all. It's
well, for what you get at that $150, that's a hell of a value, and that's a good one.
Oh, it's crazy.
$150 is still a lot of money, but when you look at what you get, that's a good one. If there's a good $150 to spend, getting the base set and a model is a great way to start.
Right? Yeah, and I always try to come up with weird little things to help my friends justify it a little bit more. I'm like, you like this stuff, just do it, because I will let you use stuff when you're over here, but I'm not going to let you borrow these. I'll let you borrow all of my Reaper and all my Army Painter. You can have at that collection, but you are not taking these. These are mine.
You'd be so surprised at how many people we have, especially overseas. We have a big contingent of people in Europe and the UK who have over time ordered two sets, one that they go to their game store with and one that they paint at home with, because they know that the one they travel with will get eaten up by people who don't have the paints, because they'll try them. They'll be like, oh my God, why are my blends so much better with this paint than everything else I've ever used? And then they start, using all their friends' paint. And we're like, and again, hopefully, as we go to retail, we'll help those people not have to buy two sets of paint, because now that they can say, yeah, go get it on the rack behind you on the store, as opposed to stop using my paints.
Dude, I am definitely a two set guy. I have my travel set and I have my one at home, and the travel set, all my friends are welcome to use while they're here, but yeah, I'm definitely the same way.
Nice. Yeah,
So
brush soap is definitely that way too. We have a lot
yeah,
of people.
that is like one of the best, like I think Christmas stocking gifts, like to give to a miniature painter.
So
Just
easy.
like,
Yeah, it's so
yeah,
easy.
yeah, like just here,
Your stored
use
gift
this.
exchange is just easy. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
something that everybody always needs. So
Well, and you when you explained to me like how the master stuff is too harsh for like sables, like once I started like really paying more attention to like when I would clean with masters versus the drunken brush group, like you were right, like it's a noticeable difference. And so I still use the masters for all my synthetics and
yeah,
like my dry brushes, like because I have a huge puck of it left, I'm just going to use it till it's gone. But like it doesn't hurt those the same way, and like you can like visibly watch your sables get shorter every single time you use them as the tips just start breaking off.
yep.
It's harder to get it sharp, and that's it's really frustrating, especially as my eyes are getting worse as I'm getting older. I am finding it harder to keep my brushes sharp and like hit those like things, and so like the brush group has really helped that aspect of my hobby quite a bit.
Awesome.
I'm not sitting here fighting my brush
Awesome. Yeah,
anymore.
exactly. Again,
Well,
man, it's like we don't care. We could come out with real flashy, glitzy stuff, and that's great. But at the bottom of it, we like workhorse products. We like to make the products that when you use them, you get that exact reaction. It's like, oh my God, this stuff works, because you're always going to need it. We always want to make sure that we're here making the products that do the heavy lifting for you and make your job easier, whether you're commission painting or just trying to bang models out so you can get to Friday night at the game store and roll dice. We want to have people focused on the having fun part, and very few people I think have fun with all the maintenance and the tough aspect of getting your products to work right. So.
yeah, well, I certainly appreciate the attention to detail and the attention to quality. It's refreshing to like get behind a brand like Monument and just be like, yep, I know that this is going to be good, and because these are tested by people who do this, and we'll kind of wrap up on your Twitch stream. That is one thing, being able to see you specifically use these things, and I like can type into chat and be like, Jason, why is this not doing this? And you're like, oh, this is what you need to do to hit that. You were talking about like the transparency and things. I mean, it seems like that is every time I watch your stream, there's probably one question about that at a time, as people are getting them now and playing with them and trying to use them. And that is such an awesome part of your business model that I totally took for granted. And while I am still a selfish person, and it is still hard for me to sit and watch a full-on stream, because I would rather just you and me be talking about this stuff one-on-one, you navigate that whole environment beautifully. Like you talk with people, you watch it, you promote your products without being like, I'm a shill for myself. It's so easy to believe in what you're saying and what you're doing, because you believe in what you're saying and what you're doing, and it's so refreshing to know that like the person that you are there on stream is the same person that you're going to get outside of stream, and that this is you, and that we all get to be part of that. And was that something that you were doing even back in the day when you're doing games, or did that happen when you made the breakaway where you're like, I have to be this thing for the company?
No, I think that because it's very, I like to believe it's very what you see is what you get. I have always been the person, or tried very hard to be the person, that what I believe in comes across. And so I kind of trained myself to say, okay, like I could never sell a product I didn't believe in is one of the things. And through my career, I've never been a salesman directly for products that, I had any issue with. I've been very lucky in being able to navigate my career along the lines of what my interests fell in with. But I think that, you asked about the video gaming. We took a big hit on the video game front. We had a pretty large stream, and then we took a little bit of a hit because I started getting tired of playing the same game all the time. I was over it. The game changes. I play PvP games, so the player base changes, the matchmaking changes. You get into these situations where it's like, this game isn't fun anymore. But I was forced, because I had an audience, I was forcing myself. Nobody had a gun to my head. But I
Right.
was forcing myself to try to continue the same thing because we had this momentum that was building, these people that would donate, this thing that was happening, this oh my God, this is awesome. And then at some point in time, I just cracked. I cracked, and I remember it well. I during a game of World of Tanks, and I was sitting there, and I team killed my own teammate because he was being a complete and utter jerk. He didn't know what he was doing. The kid could have been brand new. The thing is, I
Sure.
have no idea what's going on, and I was like, "Get out of my way!" I blew him up so that I could finish the game, and I lost a tremendous amount of viewers that night. I had, and thank God they all messaged me, or at least a huge portion of them. I probably got 30 or 40 messages over the course of the next week about how people had enjoyed watching me for so long because of the fun and the joking and just kind of the same way we run the painting stream. It can be
Mm-hmm.
irreverent sometimes. Some days we don't even paint. We just joke and talk about poop jokes, right? But it all has to do with the painting. We might spend a lot of time talking about the psychology of painting and what to do and how light and this and that and blah, blah, blah. We may never actually put paint on a model. The same thing with video games. We might only play a few handful of games, but it was the community and the camaraderie that we generated that really is what people stayed for. And so you seeing that, I think I failed to see it at one point in time, and I made it just a job. And at that point, when those people, thank goodness they contacted me, told me that unfortunately they weren't going to be able to give me their viewership and their sub and their time anymore. And that hit me hard because as an individual, I've never had the ability to sit back and say, wow, I really bummed that person out. To heck with them. That doesn't matter. It's all about me. I'm just not that guy. So when I know that it's bummed somebody out, it affects me. Whether how I handle that and what I deal with it out and outwardly is always different based on the situation. But in that situation, I had to start taking a break. I had to change the games I was playing, take it on the chin and say, I might lose my entire audience. I might go back to where the only thing in chat is the bot. And I'll get good at talking to nobody again. And I'll find something that is passionate that I love. Because I've been doing it for so long that I can't just stop doing it. And so we did. We redirected traffic, and eventually that led us to painting. And with painting, now I am me again. And I hope that, and as you're saying, I hope that comes across, because it's more about, I'll do this and I'll paint these miniatures and I'll talk to this community about painting these miniatures, whether or not I'm selling products, whatever those products are. The reality is that, and we say it on stream probably more than people want to hear, my goal as an artist is to make sure that if you choose to go down this road of art similar to what I'm doing, that I help you in whatever way I can to find your confidence and your stride so that you can enjoy this artwork the way you want to. And I don't care what that way is. I don't care what style you paint with. I don't care if you ever touch an airbrush. None of that matters to me. Your confidence is what matters. And so I hope it shows in our products. Our products are there to make you more confident by using them. But really the information we give and the way we give it is all centered around taking you as a person and understanding as much as I can thousands of miles away via the internet what it is that you're trying to tell as far as your story in this hobby. And if I can glean from that a couple of questions that you'll answer, then I can help you get further. And I believe in that. And I think that's what comes across and why people support us the way that they do, because they know that I'm going to tell you, if you don't use a single one of our products, I'm going to tell you how to use the products you do use better. And
Yeah.
I don't care if you ever buy our products. I would love it. Obviously, I need to stay alive and do this too. But at the end of the day, if you're confident in your hobby, that means there's one more person hobbying all the time, and then you'll tell two people and they'll tell two people and they'll tell two people, and eventually we will sell more products.
Yeah.
People will love this hobby and the way that I do, and get confident enough to where they let their nerd flag fly. They step out of the shadows and they come on the stream and they post something on their Facebook timeline for the first time ever that shows, hey, I'm ready to show people what I do behind the scenes. I paint these little dudes, my battle Barbies are real, and I'm in the 12-step program to realize that. It's and I love that. I think it's great, and it's fortunate and unfortunate that it took me to my 40s and now into my 50s where I'm like, I really don't care. This is what I love. This has value, and it helps lots of people along with myself to enjoy it and to find, the awesome upside in it every day. So
Yeah. Well, I've always kind of looked at it as, that the heavy metal, the heavy metal Mr. Rogers sort of mentality where
yeah,
like
exactly. That's a great way to put it.
because it may not have to be like heavy metal, but like we're painting demons and like cool shit like that. And like, there's this idea of, just embracing what you are, and that seems to be so important right now. And when you did, one of the cool things, and I'm glad that I get to talk to you about this, is to tell you thank you for doing the Resin Beast 2020 on Twitch.
Yeah.
That was crazy. I have never been so like anxiety ridden and nauseous, and then like hearing you talk about the couple people's work behind before me, and just like how you talked about what they were doing, and everything about it, and hearing how supportive you were of these efforts, and like giving ideas on how to help people get that like next little step. I'm so not used to that. Like the music world isn't that. It's never been that. The music world doesn't want to talk to you about why your beat is good and or bad. They just want to know if they can sell what you have, and that's about it. It's so like
There's a fear in it. Yeah, anything that is critical, right? Anything that can be critiqued. I've been in lots of industries where critique is held in very high regard, and it defines and directs the development of products and ventures in that industry, whether it's music, electronic, whatever. And it's true of a lot of industries, right? Clothing, and in our industry is no different. It's very critique weighted heavy. And especially now with social media and all that, everybody's putting their paint out there, and it's kind of like, oh my God, the floodgates either open up and you drown, or the floodgates open up and shower you with love. And it's not much gray in between, because the gray in between is that nobody showers you with anything, and that feels like you drowned. Right. So,
right.
So it really is fairly binary. And I'm only doing my job right if everybody paints better than me. And I hate using the term good, better, best with regards to our capabilities as artists, but it gets the point across, right? Is that if I'm doing my job correctly, then everybody out there is so confident and is learning and is getting it, and the light bulbs are going off, and their artwork just gets better and better and better and better and better. And I love it. And I every day I open up Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and I just see people that I know that have been painting now for a few years. I've seen their art progress on the stream or on other people's streams, and it's just like, hell yeah, man, you're nailing it. You got it, right? Like you really have taken those small steps and really put it to work for you. And so how do you then convey that in a competition style setting, right? Because if that's your goal as a person, which it is for me, is for you to get better, then do I just tell you get good, scrub? Because that doesn't do it, right? So, but that's the way a lot of critique is, because there's fear in critique. The person who is judging and critiquing doesn't want to give you the full answer in many cases, because then you might be as competent as they are, and then where is their value as a judge and a critic? Because if everybody is as competent as the critic, then they don't need the critic, and the critic just becomes washed away in the sauce of normalcy. And that's not a fear for me. It's like, I get it. I'd be inhuman if I said it didn't affect me, that oh my God, I have to up my game now because everybody else listened to me and now they're doing great. And so, but that's how you push yourself, right? That competition is really good. And so I'm glad that it came across, because we did it at Resin Beast with Futurecaster at Adepticon last year when we actually got Adepticon, right? And I told everybody, hey, if you would like to sit and talk with me about your model, I don't want anybody to leave. You didn't get a ribbon, you didn't get a notation, all you did was get your model back. And somebody saying thank you for entering your model. And that sucks.
Sure.
I don't care. And I get that not every competition, you go enter a Golden Demon and there's 5 million models in it. How can they possibly have the personnel to talk to everybody that entered a model? But you wish you could. At least I hope you wish you could. And so as it grows, is it going to be harder and harder to do? Yes. Will I do everything I can to continue to do it? As long as I'm involved, yes. Because I don't want anybody who wants to. Not everybody wants to have the critique. Some people are very afraid of it. Like you said, it can be very anxious ridden to be like, oh my God, he's about to tell me how bad I suck. It's because that's what's on your mind, right? So, oh God, I didn't win, and now I'm going to be told that I suck. But
I think there was 500 people on that stream. Like it was like the most I had ever done any of this miniature art in front of like that big of an audience. I was like, oh God.
Yeah. And think about it, like live at Adepticon, where the table was swarmed with people and everybody's leaning over my bench, listening to what I'm saying about this person's model and the focus. But there it was like the focus and the eye contact, looking you directly in the eye and saying, hey, first off, I love this color scheme you did, man. I'm going to steal this from you because this is bitchin'. And then, now let's talk about, the things that really jump out at me first. And I go through that system of, I see this, I see this, I see this, good and bad. and then weight the good with the bad, and be able to say, because in art there's nothing bad. It's just that these don't raise to the level that this work that you did here maybe did. And when you can communicate like a person having a normal conversation and there's no competition involved. I'm not trying to be better than you. You're not trying to be better than me. We're just trying to learn from one another. You could, because I can say something and you can come back to me and say, oh, I did that because I was trying to do this story that I saw in this picture. And I'd be like, oh, that's a great idea. So maybe don't do what I said. Instead, do this other thing that lets you focus in on the effort that you put into making the story, because it doesn't read real well, or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
And so it's really just having human interaction the way you really wish you could interact with people, is just talk and learn and listen and respond and keep going back and forth. And it was a joy to do it this year and find out that by doing it on the internet, even though there were only like a half a dozen or a dozen people that took part in it, that's great, because I feel like everybody who didn't post a model learned more than they ever would have having not sat through that session, right?
Yeah.
And so it's all the people hanging around the table who maybe had their models painted but didn't have the confidence to put it in front of the judge and get talked to about it. They now learned what they can be doing, because you'll find that if you go back and rewatch that episode, which I didn't save that episode, unfortunately, but if you were able to rewatch that episode, you'd find that 90% of my criticism is always the same. It's the same thing reworded for the model in front of me, because the same things are the same things that trip up everybody. All right. Yeah. It's value and volumes. It's how light plays on a physical three-dimensional surface is what everybody fall short on, because as soon as you get that and you move forward, that's where you start being better than ever, you could have ever been before. And so it's finding the way to take the language and adopt it to the model in front of you, so that the hard work that this person has invested isn't shortchanged. Because I'll be real honest with you, and this isn't just out of the side of my head that I say this, is that for anyone to take the time and effort to put paint on a model and submit it to a judging criteria, to me is phenomenal. You've already become a hero in my eyes, because it's one of the most difficult things to do. Here's your baby, give it to the villagers. And how's my baby? And have all the villagers flood you with drowning comments or whatever, and you're going out there and doing it. And I respect everybody that does it. I don't care what the paint looks like. The fact that you just handed my model to put in this case, you're a winner. Period. And so that's why I want to go the extra mile and say, hey, let's talk about it. Why didn't you make the cut? These are the things I'm looking for. So maybe you can't do all those things. Pick one, focus on that one, and get confident with it, and then come back and we'll talk about two, things like that. So
yeah. Well, it really came off, and it was really, really genuine hearing you say that. And awesome. It was like, after I heard you do the first one, I was like, oh, I don't have anything to be worried about. Like he's giving this the amount of time that is necessary to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and everybody feels like they're getting their fair shake. And I really appreciated it. It meant a lot, especially like I was doing literally Resin Beast was the only thing I had prepared for Adepticon, so I could literally meet you again, meet Sam Lenz and John Enos. Like, I wanted to be in a room with these people so I could have my 2 seconds of, hey, I love what you do, thank you for inspiring me. And like, that's all that, like, Resin Beast, I knew I wasn't gonna win, but I knew that it was my way to get close to these people that mean a lot to me. And having you take it with that level of respect to say, like, give everybody who sent in photos that level of time, like, that was just so cool. And I hope that there's more room for stuff like that in the future. And I think that there's one thing that COVID-19 has given to us is I think a much more collective sense of humanity and like how we're interacting with each other, because our community is kind of like super fractured right now. And so the internet has been like such a cool place for us to come together. And while like my wife is complaining about, her interactions with the internet right now, I'm having the exact opposite. I'm loving the fact that I can talk with you, that I can meet these people, that I can take part of these things. It's for me, life has gone on, and that's been really special to be a part of. And thank you so much for being a part of that journey for me here.
Well, thank you, and I hate to say you're welcome, because I don't feel like I'm doing anything different. But yeah, I'm just glad that I see the same thing. the community on Twitch, the community on the Facebook groups has grown sizably. I know people have got extra time on their hands. They're hopefully being able to focus on things that keep their brain from the insanity brink. And, we joke about it on stream. I think we're 33. Tomorrow will be 34 streams in since the isolation stuff started.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We've upped the amount of streams we do every week. We've started throwing in weekend streams so that we can spend more time with people and give them an outlet for that, because people behind the scenes and in chat have said how great it is to be able to, break away from the rest of the world. Because if you're sitting with nothing to do, you're going to get guided to social media, because that's what people do. Right. And then you're going to stare at all this jargon and divisiveness, and that can get you into a rut. So we're definitely on a pour more fuel into the tank so that we can do our part, because it helps me stay sane too, because I'm just like you. If I sit around on a Sunday and I've got nothing to do, I've started playing Minecraft again because it's my creative outlet. I can go be the world's greatest architect in block form. Behind the scenes, but that gets boring for me too. I'm not a huge video game guy anymore. And so Sunday, it's always a relief. I break out and we go stream. We did it yesterday. And, being able to catch that extra time, we do it at different time frames. So some of our European friends can join in with us too. And it's been great. And seeing the community, not only for us, but for all the other people. We've had people now start streaming. You've started onto the stream, and we've had lots of people coming in, and the community is being able to gravitate and find that content. It's when we talk about the analog to digital swing, even in our art form, being able to have this information readily available through YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitch, whatever, Patreon, is all huge. It's huge stuff that I wish I would have had. And to see the community rally around it during these times, I think has been great.
Yeah,
tons of support and tons of great content. I mean, if there's anything you've ever wanted to know how to do in painting and miniatures and rolling dice, it's out there right now. People doing battle reports by themselves. I've seen some amazing videos of dudes playing against themselves in games, competitive games like War Machine. And I actually watched the whole thing because I was like, dude, it's like this guy's two different personalities. He is literally trying to beat himself from both sides of the table. This is awesome. And, so it's been really intriguing as I go and look at the content to see what people have creatively, been able to offer to us during this time. So I hope that part doesn't stop. I hope we get back to normal, some form of normal, whatever that means. But I hope that the cool stuff that we've found here doesn't stop. I hope that people that have seen these communities join them, whether it's ours on Twitch or yours or anybody out there, that they continue to come back when their job kicks back in, that they continue to use this resource for a way to alleviate the doldrums, to get rid of the stress, and hopefully it's able to do that for them, because I think that's great.
Yeah, I am right there with you, man. And I just want to thank you for being part of this, and being a movement in this miniature hobby thing, and it really is. I can't understate how important it's been to me for the last 6 weeks, being able to interact and be a part of this and talk and find this whole new community that I didn't really have time before. So
yeah, exactly.
I mean, Jason, thank you so much, and thank you so much for talking with me. We've definitely gone a little bit over today, but I really appreciate this, and we'll have to do this again, because I think you and I could probably talk for
we've proven hours, absolute hours. This has been a blast. I'm always a fan of helping channels like you. You're going above and beyond to offer this kind of content and kind of a look inside of the brain of the hobby people out there. I love those things. I listen to them. I think it's great. I'm very I guess humbled by the fact that you would ask me on here. That's great. I enjoy it. I'm glad to do my part. So anything I can do in the future, just let me know.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Make sure you check out Monument Hobbies, the Creature Caster website. Buy some paints. Check out the Twitch streams. The Twitch streams are so fun, and you'll learn so many cool things on there. And again, Jason, thank you so much for taking your time today. I really appreciate it.
No problem, man. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Hobby Time in the Murder Basement. I so appreciate your support. If you want to see more hobby content, hop on over to twitch.tv/Heath Aldrich to see all of your fun hobby content streaming whenever I get a free chance. If you like listening to these episodes in more of a podcast form, I should be on all of your favorite podcasting apps. make sure that you like and subscribe to me there. If you can, leave me a 5-star review. I'd really appreciate it. Have a nice rest of your day, and we'll be talking to you soon.